You are listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast with Buck Joffrey. Get ready to change your life.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast. And today I would like to just start out reminding you of all the wealth of information and free resources at wealthformula.com, which is the home base for Wealth Formula Podcast. And also a place where you can sign up for my email list. You can also join the Accredited Investor Group, also known as Investor Club, because who doesn't want to join a club, especially if you qualify? And Investor Club, what is that all about? Well, if you're an accredited investor, this allows you to actually take this wealth of new information and knowledge that you have and put your money to work, if you so decide. If you want to join, you have to be an accredited investor, as I said, which means you either make $200,000 per year for at least 2 years with the expectation of continuing to do so, or make that $300,000 if you're filing jointly, or you have $1 million of net worth outside of your personal residence, which means if you just got lucky and bought a house in San Francisco 30 years ago, that doesn't count. Now, as for the other thing I should remind you is that there is a community called Wealth Formula Network, which a lot of the Wealth Formula diehards are part of. And this is a private community with a Facebook group and a biweekly mastermind call with lots and lots of interesting topics, extra content, and there are some other perks of joining as well. Not to mention, it comes with a full course that gets you caught up with the fundamentals of Wealth Formula. And we're not talking about some simple course that was put together. It actually cost me a lot of money to do with the production, and it has some really smart people like Tom Wheelwright and Kenny McElroy and Dean Graziosi and Christian Allen, and just a lot of people that are worth listening to. Kevin Day also. And check that out at wealthformularoadmap.com. Now, finally, in terms of getting on with today's show, let's do that. So when I first described my quote-unquote work to my CPA, Tom Wheelwright, he said, "So, Buck, you are an entrepreneur who just happens to be a surgeon." And I said, "Yes, I guess that's true." And I hadn't thought about it that way, but I guess that's what I am, specifically since I am not a practicing surgeon anymore, and I am an entrepreneur. Now, listen, I don't take the label entrepreneur as some kind of badge of honor. It's not necessarily a compliment. And if you've listened to me talk on this before with, say, George Newberry when he was on, you know that us entrepreneurs sometimes look at our own selves and our tendency towards entrepreneurship as more of an affliction than anything else. If you're an entrepreneur, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We can be a real pain in the butt for our significant others with all of our bright ideas and often our miserable failures. I have to admit that I seriously do often sit there and just wish that I had the DNA that would allow me to just, enjoy doing the same thing for 20 years, maybe working for somebody else and collect my paycheck and just enjoy my life. Because I know we talk so much about, being your own boss and entrepreneurship and how great people say that is, but it's also not that easy. And it's, you've got to have some coronary arteries for that kind of stuff. And I certainly have had my bumps and bruises. What is an entrepreneur anyway? Now, let's talk about that. Of course, we tend to think of entrepreneurs as people who start businesses, and by definition, that's true. But more than that, entrepreneurship is the love, maybe even the downright addiction to solving inefficiencies or problems. And if you can find a problem that is not being adequately addressed, you have a business opportunity. And for us entrepreneurs, discovering that opportunity is a rush. And that said, everyone has $1 million idea. Everyone does. They really do. I'm not saying that, tongue in cheek. How many times have you thought of something and 5 years later you see that business happen? You say, I thought about that 5 years ago. But guess what? Entrepreneurs are the ones who are foolish enough to act on those impulses because they can be smashing successes, but they can also be horrible failures. So to be clear, though, my entrepreneurial life has little to do with what I talk about on this podcast typically, which is really personal finance, investing the money you earn, however you earn it. I mean, you might, earn your money as a high-paid professional, like many doctors and lawyers and dentists. I happen to make mine by owning businesses, or at least managing the businesses that my wife owns. My businesses buy my real estate, right? And if that sounds clever, it's because it's not me who said that for the first time. I heard that from Robert Kiyosaki. That said, Wealth Formula has turned into a business, and the problem it addresses is the lack of financial education people have, along with the minimal exposure to investments outside of Wall Street's paradigm. Now, that is a problem that was waiting for me to try to address. And admittedly, I didn't set out on this podcast journey in an attempt of creating a business, but because there was a problem that was being solved, Wealth Formula became a business. Now, when it comes to investing our money itself, which again, I make the distinction of, entrepreneurship and investing. When it comes to investing our money, there are also a lot of inefficiencies in the systems. There's problems that need to be solved, and that's what entrepreneurs are there for as well. For example, let me give you one that might resonate with you. Say you've got $100,000 of money to invest every year, but you want to be involved with private investments, and most of the private investments that you see have a minimum of $50,000 per year. So how do you do that? That is a problem in the system because you are accredited maybe and you have the opportunities, but you could really only invest in 2 different deals in a year if you only had $100,000 that you could invest in a year. So anyway, that is a problem I hear about all the time. So I was really interested when a member, Jim, shout out to Jim Pfeiffer, a member of Wealth Formula Network, who introduced me to a group called TribeVest. Now, this is a very, very interesting startup that takes on headfirst this concept that I think is really simple and brilliant. I mean, most ideas are really obvious, right? They're the ones that are just like sitting right in front of you and nobody does it. And then when somebody says it, you're like, hey, why didn't I do that? That seems too simple. Why isn't somebody's got to be doing that? Well, that's what these guys are doing. So anyway, if you're an active investor and you're trying to figure out how to get exposure to more investments with the same amount of resources, you're going to want to listen to this week's episode of Wealth Formula Podcast. We'll have that show for you right after these messages. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest on Wealth Formula Podcast is Mr. Travis Smith. He is the founder and CEO of TribeVest, which is a group investing platform that is changing the way that we view and understand our financial opportunities. And he and his brothers have come up with a very interesting concept. It's in the fintech space, and that's what he's going to talk to us about today. Travis, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Buck. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So start talking to me about where this idea of TribeVest started. Go before TribeVest. What was the problem? What was the issue that you were trying to solve? And then we can come up with the solution that you came up with.
Excellent. And it's a great place to start. I say we formed the first tribe unknowingly 12 years ago. My brothers and I were coming together on a vacation, a trip, quite frankly, one that we couldn't afford. And there we had an awakening of such, in that we knew that the current financial systems were outdated, and we knew just by doing what we had been doing was never going to be enough. And together we dreamed of, financial independence and financial freedom. And we always saw real estate as a way to hack wealth without having to give up our day jobs.
Yeah.
And despite having no real estate investment experience, that was part of it. We wanted to learn. We wanted to grow together and educate ourselves in that area and in that space. But
how long ago is this now?
This was 12 years ago.
Okay,
this was
12 years ago. So you're basically thinking, we got to try something different. Real estate, maybe, I don't know, did you read a Kiyosaki book or something? What happened? Why real estate?
You called it. Yeah, we were all really impacted by the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, as I know most of your audience was as well. And that was really the moment where we thought, gosh, guys, we've got to be looking at things differently. And then finally on this trip was where we actually had a chance to collaborate on it.
Yeah. And the problem, of course, with people who read that book a lot of times, because, I talk about this too, because I had that aha moment with Cash Flow Quadrant. And it was literally a month. Oh, gosh, no, it wasn't a month. It was like a week after I finished training. And I thought, well, gosh, all I really need to do is buy a bunch of real estate and it's sort of like Monopoly, right? And then you start thinking about the fact that, wait a second, you need a bunch of money to buy real estate. And that's where I think a lot of people get stuck, right? Because there's a lot of real estate shows that love to talk about how you can get rich on real estate. But one of the problems is you actually need money to buy some in the first place. And I suspect that's where you were headed with your idea.
Exactly. Spot on. In fact, we had these conversations before, as millions of other people are having right now as we speak, around the dinner table, at happy hour, at any sort of social events. People are talking about these things. And we were having that conversation again, and quite frankly, getting frustrated with ourselves that we were just talking about it. And finally, over a few beers on the last night of the fishing trip that we were on, we had a breakthrough, and we said, "Listen, guys, let's agree to a monthly and manageable contribution of $500 a month." And that was it. It was a stretch for us at the time, but 500 times 4 of us was $2,000 a month. That was $24,000 a year. One investment turned into another. And by forming and funding that small group, we secured a future we could have never, ever dreamed of.
Okay. When you guys did this, obviously you're brothers, so there is a little bit level of trust, although I've heard some of those go bad too. But did you actually form, some kind of an LLC? What did you do?
Yeah. I think when asked why people don't invest in real estate or some other type of private venture, the first answer is capital. We don't have the money. The second is we don't know where to start. And that was where we were at. Here we had come to this, agreement that we were going to do $500 a month, but then what? And really, when people started asking us about 3 years ago, could we help them form a small investment group or an investment tribe? And that's, of course, when the light bulb started going on that we had a business here and there was a void to be filled and a pain to be solved. We kind of went back and said, gosh, if we could do this again, how would we do it? Because honestly, the way we did it was through a lot of painful trial and error. We didn't have resources. We didn't have attorneys in our family. We didn't have attorneys at the ready in our network. So really, we just went out. Fortunately, we figured out a way to do the automatic deposit. And that was the start. The start was, let's do $500 a month. Let's open up a bank account. and start. And that was what we did. And then the rest was kind of, gosh, we kind of stumbled through it.
Right. Okay. So fast forward, you've created the TribeVest platform.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit. Let's get into the weeds on that. So how does it work? I'm somebody who's got, hey, I like the idea. First of all, do I need to bring my own people to the group? Can I find others to be part of my tribe? How does that part work?
Yeah, great question. Initially, it's working with people you know, like, and trust. And yes, you've already influenced our mission and how we're talking about TribeVest. But yeah, right now it's a platform that where you come together with people you know, like, and trust, and you form a small investment group. You pool your capital, you pool your resources, your network, and you invest in things you wouldn't or couldn't on your own. And that's what we do. And we do that by making things that were difficult, things that we didn't know where to start, and making them very approachable.
Okay.
So go ahead.
The nuts and bolts of this, though, now you're not dealing with brothers. Now you're dealing with, potential, partners. And of course, when you have partners, you may know, like, and trust them, but you still need to deal with the legal implications of that. So at this point, when you break off into these tribes, are they broken off into individual LLCs, or what are they? How are they formed?
Right. So it's where do it start, right? One of your core principles is take action now. And Mark Twain said, the secret of getting ahead is getting started, right? Yep. And that's where a lot of us are challenged. So what we came up with, and it's an interesting story how we came up with this. I'll go ahead and share it. We were just starting to roll this out with our initial 5 proof of concept customers and tribes in 2017. And somebody said, hey, I have this social network. We all met each other at our preschool and our kids' preschool. We play poker together. We do fantasy football. Our families hang out over the weekend. And I think if I ask this group of 16 dads, I can get like 4 or 5 of them to join. And when he pitched the idea of forming this tribe, all 16 of them raised their hand and said, we're in.
Yeah.
So what was my challenge then? Was this the worst first customer or the best first customer? And it depends how you look at it. But what I was challenged with was, how do I make 16 people come together and make sure that they're all aligned? And I can't do that with 16 by getting them on a conference call and talking. I needed to come up with a way to make sure that they were qualified to do this together. And what came out of it is a 29-point tribe aligned survey where each individual comes and answers their profile independently. And then we serve up an anonymous third-party alignment report that it doesn't say, hey, Buck answered it this way and Travis answered it this way. It just says, hey, collectively on a point graph, how did we answer these questions? And are we a good fit? And that becomes the basis for a conversation, right? Yeah. Before we jump into it, let's get a tribe alignment and have a conversation around this.
Okay. So now you realize maybe you get, let's just say, 4 or 5 guys together and they are aligned. What's the next step?
So one of the big lessons when we went back and said, gosh, what would we do differently? It was definitely, I wish we would have talked about and agreed on the rules up front, right? All those, how much, how long. It's important that this is time bound. And 2, then what, and all the what ifs that are super uncomfortable to talk about, especially with friends. And TribeVest makes that very approachable and even kind of a fun thing. But first of all, we're in the business of, we think tribe investing is a way to broaden markets and participation in places where people haven't been able to be previously.
Right.
So wherever you form your tribe, we're happy. But if you're going to do it on the TribeVest platform, you need to agree and vote on the rules of the game up front. So that's step 2.
Right. So now you've got your constitution, how you're going to approach, money issues, what happens if somebody isn't putting in money, how you're going to choose deals, what is the process by which you determine which opportunities to invest in, right? So now you got that going.
Exactly. That's
Now
exactly
what?
right.
Now what?
So now we've taken that off the table. And by the way, we're just as proud about the groups that came in and got to this point and decide not to form a tribe as we are the ones that go on to form the tribe.
Sure. Understood.
So the next step now is you've agreed on to how much and how long. So you take my brother's example, and this is our average tribe is 5 people. The average monthly contribution is about $400 to $500 a month. And once we've agreed on those rules of the game, you pull up and you actually link your bank account to your FDIC insured TribeVest account, and you start saving together on a monthly basis.
Okay, got it. And that's getting pulled into a single bank account, which is an LLC.
Well, and let me stop you. Let me stop you there. So
that is now the 3rd time I've asked you that, Travis.
Right. Well, the LLC's coming, and by the way, and you have a very sophisticated audience,
right.
And if you already have LLCs, we'll make sure to point out where they would just come in and start using the services.
Oh yeah, no, we're going to get to all that.
We're talking about forming the tribe. So
stuff yet. So so go ahead.
Exactly. No, keep driving me to where we need to get for sure. But I think just an important thing to point out is part of this initial steps is you're actually opening up an individual bank account for yourself. So you're not commingling these funds yet. But a little bit of the magic is when you're looking at your Tribe View dashboard,
got it.
You're seeing everybody's, living up to their commitments. They're seeing the goal and where we're reaching. So to this point, you're still not. You're not married yet. You're not married yet. Although the social peer pressure is pretty strong.
Right, because people can see if you're doing your part or not, and if you're not, maybe in your constitution you get kicked out.
Exactly right.
Okay.
So and now, then I know what's coming. Then what? Yeah. So now we're saving, and this is just a popular one for us. They're either saving for a threshold of $50,000 or $100,000 into a syndicate, or they're saving for a vacation home is a really big sweet spot for us. So now they've saved $50,000 for their $200,000 vacation home, a down deposit, and now it's time for them to form an LLC. And on our platform, we have a partnership with a number of legal firms that help us automate this whole process. And you go in and you dedicate who the officers are, who's the president, who's in charge of tax matters, who's the secretary, because you're operating like an LLC, and that's really important part of this. And of course, everything you agreed to before is also part of that constitution, which now becomes part of your operating agreement.
Okay, got it. So now you have an LLC, and let's jump into the LLC part, because now you're navigating into a scenario where you're raising capital. You're not raising it per se. It is a joint venture, but usually by definition, not by definition, but usually when you've got like a lot of different sources of capital, something triggers that makes it into a security. So these are not registered, and they're not Reg D securities. These are LLCs. These are just general partners. How have you addressed that with SEC counsel and how that works, and what conclusions have you come up with?
Yeah, you bet. And I was anticipating this, and it's when we start to work with more and more sophisticated investors, they start to see this as a tool, and they want to see how far they can, what problems does this tribe investing solve? And, really with the help of your audience, we're actually learning more, but I just want to take a quick step back because this is a really important distinction. We are not an investment company. We aren't building investment products. We're not selling investment products. We don't get fees or referrals or any type of things like that. So no more than Uber, right, is in the taxi business or in the business of owning taxis, or Airbnb's in the business of owning real estate. That's a little bit like TribeVest. We're not in the business of selling or building investment products. So that's just number one. But you think about it, there's nothing to stop us if we already know each other, we're acquaintances, we know, like, and trust each other, to forming an LLC and pulling our capital together to go make some kind of transaction. Now, as you get more and more sophisticated, depending on what you're investing in, we're going to advise you to talk to your attorneys and everything else like that. But if you're buying a vacation home together, it's just a best practice. It's a best practice to form an LLC, put an operating agreement in place, and go buy a vacation home together.
Right.
So,
I guess part of that, in this situation, I'm just thinking about out loud about how that works. And then there's not a distinction between a general partner and a limited partner. Typically, these would have to be all general partners in a business activity, I guess, and the business would be of investing. I'm curious, have you, I hate to beat this, but what potential hazards have you contemplated with that kind of model?
Well, we've uncovered a few things that are really important, right? So the operating agreement has to be in place. You do have to have officers assigned that are playing specific roles. So you have to play by the rules. You have to act and look like a real LLC business.
Right.
The other thing is that are all these investors active?
Right.
And yes, they should be. And by the way, on our platform and our TribeView dashboard, you actually have a voting tool. So if before we make any major transactions, we've already voted what the voting threshold is to make a purchase. And now we're actually going to have it on record showing that each member has come in and voted on that, which is by definition very active in this decision-making process.
Yeah.
So those are just some of the things that we're doing to make sure that we're staying within, and we're not getting into any clouded area. The market is way too big for us to really start to play with those things. And it makes sense in a lot of cases, because sometimes there's a person like in your group, in your audience, these are all really smart, driven people. They've found their tribe. Quite frankly, like if my brothers and I would have had a wealth formula tribe, we would have been listening to you guys, but we didn't have it. But
right.
These people are motivated. They've gone out there and they're learning how to find these investments. They're networking. They're finding them. And now, in a lot of cases, it's how can I participate in more of them?
Right.
And so if you come together and you pull your capital, instead of doing one a year, maybe you're doing 5 a year, and you're spreading and diversifying. But when you start to bring other people along, where you want to get compensated for it, right? Like you want to, because you're the one that's doing all the work.
Yeah.
That's when we kind of say, listen, you got to really talk to your own attorney about that and figure it out. And
right. Because then you're starting to become a security at that point. So yeah, I can't say that I really know, that I can say one way or another. I'm not an SEC attorney, but I do understand you do need to be part of the process. You can't be a passive investor. You have to be sort of an active person at the very least. It is a tricky space. Now, the next question becomes, in my mind, is, and I've actually run into this already, I believe, with somebody in your group, which is, okay, so when you have a group that wants to invest in things, there are guidelines that for example, we restrict certain investments to accredited investors, right? So in those situations, do you have a criteria? Do you have things on your site that help people, either verify or make sure that each other are accredited investors? Because typically the way it works is that for an entity to invest into like a regulation regulation D 506B or C, you have to have everybody in that LLC needs to be accredited individually. I mean, the other way you could do it is if the corporation or whatever has like over $5 million in assets, but typically most of us who are doing this in LLCs are doing it individually or partnerships or entities that all the members are accredited. So can you talk to that a little bit and, your experience with that so far? Are you seeing people kind of segregate into accredited groups and non-accredited groups and that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. There's just too much interpretation. And so our first thing is the cleaner, the better. And, I know you have an investment group that is designed around accredited investors, and therefore you're talking about accredited investor opportunities. So anytime you're coming together with fellow accredited investors, of course, you're in really good shape.
Right.
You can start to look at the rules more granularly, in that, for example, if you have $5 million in net worth amongst the group, all of a sudden your entity could be considered an accredited. Now, we are not, I want to be really clear, we are not giving any advice or guidance or anything else. We're really a platform. We got to know this stuff. Don't get me wrong, Buck. We got to know this stuff because that we're helping these people achieve what they're trying to achieve, and they need to understand the guidelines and rules. But we do see, and we're digging more and more into, is there an opportunity for more people to participate in different types of investments? Maybe. But right now, if you're accredited and you want to get together with another accredited investor, you can become an accredited entity and therefore participate in everything that comes with that.
Right. And just to be clear, I mean, that's basically how, our approach is an investor club. Is there are people who want to come in, and we actually believe did have somebody coming in through TribeVest. It wasn't, I don't know if it ended up happening for sure or not, but it was it was on the voting block, I guess. The first question I had to ask was, is everybody accredited? And so on our own forms, we're going to have, how is the entity, why is the entity accredited? And one of the things basically that's checked off there in that situation is that everybody individually within that LLC is accredited. So typically that's what you're going to need to do in a 506B. The trickier step is going to be when you have Reg D 506C, that at that point requires, now everybody in that group is going to have to have, proof of being accredited vis-a-vis, tax returns, or maybe you individually go to one of these online platforms and get certified into as an accredited investor. So anyway, there are some challenges there, but it's a very, very interesting concept. So how old is the business? How many groups do you have? And kind of get into that a little bit.
Yeah, so we're onboarding to so we had you heard me talk about our proof of concept. We had our version 1 in 2018, and we realized that this was a business that could scale, right? We know that by these groups forming and funding their small groups, that it's changing their lives. They're investing in building wealth like they never knew they could. And if we can do that at scale, we don't just change, some lives, we could ultimately change the world. And so we went out and we built our version 2, which is in the middle of a private beta launch. And I'm inviting anybody, here to participate in this into what we're calling as our Founders Club. But our private private beta launch is with our first 1,000 tribes. And our founders clubs are, there's 100 founders club members, 100 founders club members. And again, we're inviting some of your group or whoever here, because what we're doing in this beta, in this exercise that we were doing that we were doing before, Buck, and just kind of thinking about where this could go and what do we need to be concerned about. You know, this is, our customers are taking us to places we never knew, right? And as we start to see paths forming and more people going down a certain path, we want to start building education and services around those areas. In fact, that's one of our revenue models, is to be able to be there when they need different services. But long story short is we're onboarding our first 1,000 customers for a public launch in July.
Got it. So how do you, as a business, obviously it's nice that you're doing this, but how do you make money?
Yeah, thank you. So it's $5 per individual per month.
No, it's not bad. Okay. Interesting.
And then I did touch on what gets really exciting though, Buck, for us, is you think about it, these groups, they don't look much like a business initially. We call them micro businesses in a lot of cases. But as they accumulate capital, as they accumulate assets, they start to turn into a real business, like my brothers and I. Yeah. And then they need bookkeeping, right? Then they might need some attorney services. They might need insurance. They might need property management connections. You know, so all those types of things. And we don't have those all built in right now, but we're betting on the success of these tribes. And in the future, while they're on our platform, while they're looking at their Tribe View dashboard and looking at all their documents and being able to vote and chat and seeing their balance and all the activity, and they need a bookkeeping service, or they need whatever it might be, we want to be able to introduce them to someone that can help them out, that understands them as a small group.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Interesting. So yeah, it's basically some different verticals that are, you know, that can potentially be complementary over time to build out your own business. Certainly makes a lot of sense. I do like the idea a lot. You know, I think, you know, hopefully, well, how do people reach out to you if they're interested in getting involved with the beta? If they want to, you know, potentially talk about, you know, forming their own tribe, I can pretty much guarantee you there are people in this group who are going to want to do this. What's the next step, and what's the advantage of being in the beta?
Right. And I can confirm, you're right. There are people in this audience that want to do it and are actually in our founders club. Yeah. And you know, the idea there with a couple of them is, again, I can maybe invest in 1 or 2 a year, or can I invest in 5 or 6 a year with my group? And it's been really awesome to see. Contact me directly, and I'll give you a number of ways to contact me, but Travis@TribeVest.com. And anybody in this audience, please reference, you know, Wealth Formula, and we'll interview you for the Founders Club, and it's free services for life for you and your tribe. So no $5 fee. You get $100 off your first LLC formation, and you become a very important part of our company, in that you'll actually be invited to all of our VIP networking events and everything else. So you're in a club, so to speak. Now, what's the catch? The catch is, by being one of these early customers and tribes, we're gonna ask you for feedback. We're actually gonna schedule time with you. We're gonna ask how things went, where you're going. We're gonna have your members do really short surveys, all in the spirit of getting the solution to where we want it to be going forward.
Got it. Well, this has been fantastic, and definitely we'll put all that information in the show notes. Travis, good luck to you, my friend. Great concept, and thanks for being on the show.
Buck, thanks for all you're doing out there. Really appreciate it, and glad to be here.
Be right back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Now, I have to tell you again, I think this concept is really, really clever, and I also should add that I haven't done a ton of due diligence on the team or the business as of yet, but I think it's certainly something worth digging into a little bit more if the problem that it deals with resonates with you. But again, do your own diligence. I'm not involved with them. I am not paid by them. I am not, on a board or anything. I just think it's a really neat idea. And, it was introduced to me by somebody within Wealth Formula Network, which, gives it that sort of authenticity of that know, like, and trust concept. I like this idea enough where I did actually ask Travis to join us on one of our mastermind calls in Wealth Formula Network in the next couple of weeks. So those of you in the group, if you're in that group, you will get a chance to ask questions. I think he's going to bring his own attorney along to answer any legal questions regarding how this works. And it may be a chance for you to also form your own group. That brings me back to mentioning again that you should consider joining Wealth Formula Network, and you can do that at wealthformularoadmap.com. Don't miss the fun. This is where the magic happens, wealthformularoadmap.com. Anyway, that is it for me this week. This is Buck Joffrey with Wealth Formula Podcast, signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast. Visit us on the web at wealthformula.com. The information contained in this podcast are opinions, not fact. As always, consult your own financial team before making any investment. See you next time.